Hello and welcome to another episode of TPA Talks. We're joined today by Shaun Bailey, the London Assembly member and former candidate for Mayor of London. He's going to be talking to us about ULEZ, Sadiq Khan's legacy and his own journey into politics. So stay tuned and I hope you enjoy. Shaun, thank you very much for joining us on TPA Talks today.
Absolute pleasure.
We know you're a London Assembly member. We know you've run for London Mayor, you've run for Parliament a number of times, but what was it that got you into politics?
I think there's three things that got me in politics. One was a personal thing. I used to listen to a lot of hip hop music. One of the sort of big bands at the time was Public Enemy, and they were very political. And I just wanted to know what they were talking about, constantly going on. And that sort of drove me to pay attention to politics. Later on in life, I became a youth worker. And I used to do a lot of youth and community work in my area. And I wanted people to have independent lives. And I didn't realise that was a small C, in fact, a large C conservative view. I didn't realise that at the time, but it was really important to me. So I ran my youth project and I constantly talked to people about you've got to get independent, you've got to be able to make your own decisions. Let's try to make that happen. And I come from a very poor community, which, to my mind, had always been made to be dependent, always thought of itself as having always was talked about as having no agency. And I didn't believe that. I grew up with a mother who was big on volunteering, who got out and helped the community. And it was just my way of repeating my mum's activities elsewhere. And also with that tinge of youth work where I wanted to say to people, let's move forward. I remember once my uncle saying to me, the happiest people in the world are the people furthest away from the government. And I was just trying to make people independent and be far away from the government.
So you've said before, and I guess this sort of feeds into that Londoners are hustlers and they're sort of trying to constantly got a great big entrepreneurial spirit. How can that be enabled by government? You know, is it just by leaving them alone, or are there things government can put in place to nurture that kind of instinct?
Let me build on this theme. I say Londoners are hustlers because there's absolutely no way you build a world-class capital like this by the auspice of government. They wouldn't know where to start. They wouldn't know what to do. London is great because of Londoners, and that extends to the whole country. What makes this country great? It's not its governments. It's never been its governments. It's been its civil activity. It's been the people of this country. And in order to keep that going, particularly London, where arguably we are the engine room, the hub, you need to get out of people's way. And there's very distinct ways of getting out of people's way. Stop infantilizing the public. Stop making more and more victims every day. People often tell me off for saying left and right, but let's be clear, a real feature of the left is making everybody feel that they're a victim. Victims very rarely innovate. Got to make people feel like they have a place here, they're strong, they can move forward. The other piece as well is less tax. I know right just now that might not be a popular view, but if there's two ends of that argument. One is that incentive. If I spend all my time building a business that pays other people's mortgages besides my own, and then I'm taxed to pieces, why would I do that? I'm paying stamp duty, and if Labour have their, I'll be paying death taxes. That kind of taxation stifles enterprise big time. And the other piece as well is always having a system that values companies that try to build things. Yes, London is very famous for finance and long may that reign, but I do think now, as an economy, not just London, but as an economy, we need to look at businesses that build, businesses that provide employment, businesses that are looking to stay around for 10, 15, 20 years time, not businesses that are looking to just scrape the cream off the top and move on. We need real business that employs people.
So, you know, last week we had the budget from the Chancellor. What did you make of it?
I think there's two ways of looking at the budget. One, it was a political budget. It was a safe budget. It was a budget that wasn't going to put the cat amongst the pigeons. Nobody panicked, which at this time you could argue is the right thing to do, not only from a party political point of view, but also from a public point of view. That's what you could say. But the other way of looking at it is where's my tax cut? And I say this for a very specific group of people. The squeezed middle, you know, we don't talk about them anymore. But they are the people whose tax is horrendous, but they're the people who have to work for a living. And what's important about that is if you're at the bottom of our system and you do the right thing, you work hard, you move up, the tax penalises you and you're effectively at the bottom again. And that stops people moving their families to financially safe places, etc., etc. So I think for me, I would always look for a budget, especially in these times now. We have the greatest tax burden we've had for 70 years. I would look for a budget that gave people back more of their own money. I just think that's the best way of getting that feeling, that making people feel like they can deal with the cost of living, and also, growing our economy into the future. Because it's important. If you keep giving government subsidies to deal with cost of living, I don't think you'll ever actually get past it.
Yeah, I mean, we've been quite vocal, in our opposition to the kind of stealth taxes of the frozen thresholds, and we welcome the adjustments on pension contributions. That was a really good move. But again, one of the things, on more of on the corporate taxation side, we saw the increase in corporation tax, which was spoken out against by a number of former chancellors. What's your take on the corporation tax rise, and also perhaps if you could comment a bit on the other measures for businesses, so the full expensing and things like that, which the chancellor brought in to supposedly offset the increase in corporation tax rise?
I'll do one better than that. And I'll talk about business rates. I have not met a business, particularly medium to small business, which this economy is built on, that hasn't said, when are we going to sort business rates out? And I think that's the one better that we could have done. And I say it's not just a financial piece. If you sort out business rates, yes, there's the financial uplift, these companies working better, and that's the important bit, but it sends a message about the government's feelings around helping enterprise. And it doesn't matter where you sit in the political spectrum, right on the left, right on the right, you will understand that you need tax receipts to pay for all the things we like, NHS, school, whatever. But that comes from getting those small businesses to move. Because remember, a big business used to be a small business. And the thing that's hobbled small businesses the most is business rates. That's what they all talk about. Corporation tax is of course it's important, because that talks about our attractiveness as a place to do business on the international level. But of course, those big businesses have so much more flexibility about how they pay their tax, when they pay their tax, where they pay their tax. So when you talk about doing business rates, I think you do more for our economy in general. And there's something that the Chancellor didn't touch on at all that I would really do something about, and it's about payments. When do companies get paid? I've spoken to so many small businesses when I was running for mayor who went under with people owing them hundreds of thousands of pounds. Some of the largest businesses in this country don't pay their invoices for 90 days. And if you're a small business, a farm, a small retailer, that kills you. And it's the biggest businesses that hold on to this practice. And I nearly said I as the mayor there. If I was the Chancellor, I'd have wiped that practice out, because I think it sends a poor message about how we all feel about enterprise.
You spoke a bit about your time running for London Mayor then, and one thing which Londoners have coming their way later this year is the expansion of the ultra-low emission zone to cover all of the London boroughs. How do you think that's going to impact Londoners, particularly in poorer households?
So there's two things I'd say. When I ran for mayor, I made a video about this coming in, the cost of driving London, and I was roundly called a liar. Lots of different press outlets wrote stories about how I was a liar. Fast forward 18 months, look where we are. So clearly I was telling the truth. The mayor was always going to have this coming. He said as much. The second thing is, in the mayor's own study, it said that 20% of small businesses will just die because of the extension of the ULEZ. That alone is a reason not to extend the ULEZ, because it's those small businesses that give the most disenfranchised young people and communities their first chance. So to wipe them out, to take away people's bread and butter, I think is immoral, just for a crusade. The other thing to say as well, the mayor keeps talking about air quality in London. Let's be very clear. His own study uses the word negligible. It will provide a negligible benefit to air quality in London. It's an absolute lie when they say it's going to do something for air quality. It isn't about that. It's so that the mayor can gallivant around and say he pushed through hard environmental policies and the rest of us should follow him. Well, actually, he should listen to the poorer people in London who are about to have their employment taken away, who won't be able to attend hospital, who cannot afford to change their car. And this, all the poorest people inside London and also just outside London as well. And if you happen to live in the centre of London and think this will have no effect on you, where does your plumber live? Where does your florist live? Who cleans your streets? Who works in your schools? How do they get to work? Where do they come from? A huge amount of people in London live just outside of London and drive into work. And they're the very people who cannot afford a ULEZ, and they're the very people that the mayor is going to penalise.
The mayor's sort of, suggested that, people who oppose ULEZ, that they don't care about premature deaths from clean air, or that people who oppose the expansion of ULEZ are some sort of, extremists. What do you make of those sorts of accusations from Sadiq Khan?
Listen, because your clientele are such highly educated people, I'm going to break this down so they can really look at the arguments. So if the mayor says there's 4,000 people who die from premature lung deaths in London, yes, but that means his own failure has been his own policy has been a failure, because we've had the central London ULEZ and he was quoting the same figures then. So has that had an impact or not? Because if it's had no impact, then why would we extend it? That's the first piece. The second piece is, of course, it won't have that effect. His own study has said that. And there's so many alternatives to expanding ULEZ if you want to do air quality, or he should tell us the truth. This is about raising money. This is about taxing Londoners off the streets. If he wants to do that, that's fine, but he should tell people the truth. Because if he wanted to clean the environment, he could give the money to local councils to do it. We could be planting hedges. We could be making the bus fleet more green. We could just do scrappage. We could get all the oldest polluting cars off the roads of London just by doing a huge scrappage scheme. And by not doing the ULEZ, he'd give him, 50, 60, 70 million more to put towards that scrappage scheme. That's what we should be doing, not penalising London's most vulnerable.
So another sort of quite divisive clean air policy that's been rolled out in London is low traffic neighbourhoods. During your mayoral campaign, you said you'd like to have them scaled back to some degree, or targeted to the areas.
Removed was the words I used.
Why are LTNs so divisive, and what's the impact on not just London residents but London businesses as well?
So there's two reasons. One of the reasons they're divisive because the mayor never took responsibility for them. When he thought they were popular in the beginning, he said, "It's government. It's me." When he thought they were unpopular, the government had provided the money. And I think what Londoners wanted was someone to take responsibility for them, so they could be put in the right places and taken out in the wrong places. But where they got really divisive, because it often turned out two things. One, they were put in certain places that meant all the nicer houses and nicer roads had a real reduction in traffic, but then all the traffic was going through the poorer areas, snarling up the place and pumping lots of fumes into an environment that didn't have those fumes in the beginning. By its very nature, a low traffic neighbourhood makes the main roads more clogged, and that's where many more of the sort of poorer working class people have to do their business. That's why they were divisive. Not to mention the fact that many of them stopped fire engines getting through and ambulances. And on top of that, they made certain roads very, very quiet late at night, which made them very, very scary, particularly for women. Lots of women said, well, this road used to have people and cars on it. Now I don't feel I can come out here late at night because it's very lonely and I feel unsafe on this road. And I think that's very divisive. And the last piece I'll say, which is the real crux of the matter, local people weren't informed. There's hundreds of low traffic neighbourhoods that were putting in the wrong place at the wrong time. And local people would have said, we don't oppose them, we just oppose this one because it's wrong. There was examples of LTNs being put in just off the A12. Now the A12 is a major road, it's a high-speed road. And as soon as you turn off, there's a big planter. It was physically dangerous. And the local people said that, nobody listened to them. That's why, that was just another reason why they were very controversial.
And just like ULEZ, LTNs, they sort of, the result of that is, another result of that is a big transfer of cash from motorists to councils in this instance. Some of the research the TPA has done has shown around £100 million going to councils in London. So we know why they're controversial, but and you sort of touched on it there. Weren't they in part made possible by the Conservative government that provided the funding for them?
Yes, they were. There's no getting away from that. The funding was provided by the government. One of the other reasons, sorry, I forgot to say why they were controversial, because they killed many small shops. And those small shops are vital community hubs, not just from the sort of retail offer they have, that bottle of milk you need, the extra pack of sausages or whatever it is, but the employment they provided, the life they provided to a neighbourhood. Many small shopping areas are killed because of LTNs. I think that's worth saying. Yes, the government did provide the money, but it was up to the mayor and local councils to administer that money. Now, any money that the government's going to give to London, let's have some more. Absolutely, that would be my stance. But what you do with that money is important. So I don't think it's fair to say the government did the wrong thing. The government gave the money. I mean, for instance, a council or the mayor could have just not taken the money, could have just sat there and gone back to the treasury. But no, they decided to take it and try to sneak past developments that they couldn't ordinarily do. That was the horrible part of it.
And, you know, clean air is clearly kind of an issue through which, you know, Sadiq Khan would like his legacy to be viewed. What do you think Khan's legacy will look like as mayor, not just on clean air, but on things like crime and other issues as well, like strikes and whatnot?
Well, he's had a record level of strikes. He's had the 2 highest years for homicide of any mayor. I think history will judge him rather harshly. London now feels significantly different than it did when I was born and raised here. I'd argue this is the worst it's ever felt. You know, anything from bike lanes in the wrong place to he's had a 57% rise in his portion of the council tax. All of these things and many more things in between have added up to a London that feels under more pressure than it need be. And there's no doubt it's been because of decisions that Sadiq Khan has made. And the idea that his policies will, particularly his green policies, will be looked at as a good legacy is simply not true, because he will never take responsibility. So now that people are pushing back against the expansion of the ULEZ, he's now started saying he nicked the idea from Boris Johnson. I mean, what a coward of a man. If you believe in the policy, go with the policy. Don't, do a focus group, decide that it's a problem and try and give the problem to somebody else. And I think what we'll see, history will say that Sadiq Khan was a mayor who never really led London. You could have loved Ken, you could have hated Ken, he led London. The same can be said about Boris. Sadiq Khan basically responded to focus groups, and that's evident in the outcomes for London.
You talk there about this kind of lack of sometimes taking responsibility and not leading. And in terms of the kind of structure of London government, I think, sometimes there's a tendency in devolved governments to kind of blame their own failures on central governments or other governments, that sort of thing, whether it's claiming there's not enough funding coming through or whatever it is. Do you think devolution is working well for London?
So what you've just described is what's known in my head as the Nicola Sturgeon effect. She had a perfect situation. Everything good was her, everything bad was Westminster. Look, we are an advanced economy, and I think a economy such as ours needs devolution. You do need to give those regional mayors, whatever their political stripes, some level of autonomy to maximize the opportunities they get, because it isn't one size fits all anymore. Of a very centralized country, I'm one of the people who has less problem with that than most, but I also acknowledge that we do need regional control, housing, transport. I mean, a good example of that would be Crossrail. We've been speaking about Crossrail since the 60s, but we didn't achieve it until we had a mayor to push it through. You can't ask a local council to spend money in 32 other councils. It's not going to happen, whereas a mayor can do something like that. I think the key with making devolution work is actually lies with ministers. Had I been a transport minister or the treasury, chancellor, I would have made it quite clear where my responsibility lies and where yours lies, and I would have done it to the public. Like, for instance, Sadiq Khan keeps talking about we need a scrappage scheme in London. So he wants to put in a policy and then ask the government to pay it. That's ridiculous. If you're mayor, you have to have policies that are relevant to the size of budget you have. Same if you're a council leader, if you lead Andy Burnham, Sadiq Khan, all of them must make policies relevant to the money they have. They should always ask for more, but they shouldn't use it as a crutch or to hide their own inequities, and that's certainly what Sadiq Khan has done.
And do you think you'd give running London another crack?
Look, I ran for London because I was desperate to give London an alternative. I could see we had a mayor who was, if I'm generous, quite fond of fiction. And I just wanted to shine a light on Londoners who in my parlance, have to work for a living. People who can't afford Sadiq Khan. If I think that that's relevant this time around, yes, of course I could do it again. I was gratified by the huge number of Londoners who came out and supported me. I won in places where Conservatives have never, ever existed. And that showed me that actually I was able to bring a message beyond politics. Yes, I'm a Conservative, small and big C, but really what I'm about is helping you have an independent life. I want you and your children and your grandchildren and your great-great-great-grandchildren to have a stake in their own future, because it's my belief when you feel connected to Britain PLC, we all do better. And the way I connect you is by you having your own, owning your own home, having a job, not being dependent on the government. Whereas I saw Sadiq Khan as serving his own political needs. I wanted to serve the outcomes of Londoners. So if I feel like I can do that again, I will go again.
Let's say you were successful, and if you had been successful last time, then today you'd be looking at the front pages and looking at Baroness Casey's report, with some shocking revelations about the Met, about the culture in the Met and the force's ability to sort of function properly. Some are even suggested it should be broken up. What do you think the response should be to the findings we've seen today?
Let me take this back to the beginning. It won't be lost on your viewers that I'm a black person. I think people in my community have been saying this for years. So somebody this morning said to me, oh my gosh, have you read it, all these revelations? None of this is a revelation to me. What I'm surprised about is that it took nearly 7 years. So Sadiq Khan's been mayor for 7 years. It took him 7 years to get to this conclusion. You ask anybody who'd spent 20 minutes with the police and they could tell you that most of the police service is absolutely stellar. But there's a significant part that needs addressing, a la Baroness Casey's report. So that's the first thing. It's not a revelation to me. The second thing is the response should be for the mayor and the commissioner to roll their sleeves up and get involved. I think the police has had challenge with quite senior police officers defending the behaviour of junior police officers, every police officer, very poor behaviour, being the defensive of that, and that's how it's built up when it's built up. So it needs to be all done in daylight. I think it will give the current commissioner the strength he needs if it's done publicly, because he'll need to go to his senior officers and say, look, this is bigger than all of us, we're going to have to change this, or the force could go. What I would say about some of the more sort of practical elements of it, I wouldn't break the Met up. I would not do that. I think breaking up the Met would weaken it. One of the Met's strengths is it's cohesive over the whole of London, and I think it needs to remain that way. Could it work better with the services around it? Absolutely, absolutely it should. One of the sort of smaller things I think we could do is we could do a bit more of our specials. Being a special in the Met isn't quite as interesting as being a special in other forces. Specials in other forces get more access to the sort of full gambit of what it is to be a police officer. I hope we're working on that here. But the main thing now is that people at the top have to do two important things. One, they have to lead from the front, and they have to be prepared to take on the old guard and simply get rid of them if need be. But they also have to stand up for the police service, because if we rob the police service of all of its authority, then we're all at risk. It must maintain a level of authority so it can deliver the law. Because a police service that is been emasculated, or we turn into an extended version of social services, means we're all at risk.
So we sort of talked a bit there about, reforming the Met or not reforming the Met, or breaking up or not breaking it up. There's a lot of councils in London. In terms of the structure of London government, do you think, there's some room for reform there, or at City Hall level?
I don't know. It'd be easy to look at councils and say there's too many of them, let's split them up. But if you look at the ratio of councillors to Londoners, it's pretty huge. So I wouldn't be in a hurry to break up to make there less councils. I might look at a little bit of reform. I certainly would try to get them to work quite closely with City Hall. In Sadiq Khan's defence, he is fairly close to London councils. He doesn't see them as a threat. He does work with them, and long may that happen. What I'm about to say might sound a little bit bizarre, but I would probably give councils countrywide a little bump in their income. I think they're asked to do an awful lot with a little. And in the past, that's correct because they were bloated. But right here, right now, I do think when you look at the huge sums of money we borrow to do all kinds of stuff, I'm a bit, I don't know what's the word. I wouldn't say concerned. I'm a bit disappointed that councils maybe didn't get a little bit more. I mean, if you gave councils countrywide 1 or 2 billion. I mean, between all of them, with no strings attached, they could all set their finances straight, and we could almost have a reset and start again, because we continually ask them to do new things, and I'm not sure we continually fund those things properly.
You make an interesting point about council funding, and one of the reasons that we keep seeing council tax rises. City halls tend to defend that as saying, well, we're not getting a big enough settlement from the government. But we see some fat cats and local authorities on huge salaries, often sometimes on more than even the Prime Minister. So isn't it the case that local authorities should be looking to cut back on the big salaries and the waste before expecting more money from the public through the Treasury or from raising council tax?
They're two separate issues, aren't they? So that big salary, that for me is a civil service issue. That's a pension reform issue. That's a very separate issue. I'm talking about the function of a council. The council has to, collect bins, provide nurseries, make the sidewalk work, all those kind of things. I just think in that light, they could do a little bit. I might even be talking about a windfall, a one-off payment to just settle up. Okay, when I talk about reform of councils, I would have a little look at what a council is responsible for, and I do it on a regional basis. So if you take London, for instance, many of our councils are legally liable for really expensive things, such as Hammersmith Bridge. No, I would give Hammersmith Bridge to TfL and, adjust the funding accordingly. And you could do that regionally. I'm sure if you went and spoke to Andy Burnham, he'd say there's certain things that I should probably be doing that the council shouldn't be doing, and you can have a negotiation, you can get it done. Because but I see councils as how we administer the country. Most people's first and last contact with the government is through their council. So I think it's a mechanism that needs to be nurtured and done properly. I do think it's correct that councils were taken to task many years ago and really forced to look at their budgets. But you could argue now that that's been done. We've had a pandemic, we've had a crash, 2008, we've had all kinds of things that councils have had to survive. Going into the future, we should look at the whole council thing again, and I'm imagining if we did that, somewhere along the line, there'd be a little uplift in their income. And if I was the government, I would want to be known as the Conservative government that helped councils, square their books, because that's how most people actually feel government.
So finally, and sort of leading on from waste, a lot of the work we've done at the TPA is, calling out woke spending in Whitehall, whether that's spending lots and lots of money on diversity training or things as innocuous as, spending a lot of money on, say, LGBT lanyards and things like that. What's your view on that sort of spending? Would you rather see it, scaled back, or are you sort of broadly comfortable with that sort of thing?
So that uplift I just talked about in council spending would be only if they stopped doing that. Because the people at home who are struggling to make ends meet, people at home who people on the left claim to care about, don't want to pay for that stuff. And why it's important, because it is their money paying for that stuff. It is not right. The NHS could have a real look at what they're spending people's money on. Councils could too, any government body could. And that's before you start looking at quangos, which don't sort of come up in sort of government world, but absolutely take our tax dollars, so it should be looked at. I think of all of that spending needs to have a look at, because what we're doing in this country is using our collective tax money to forward certain people's political agenda, and I don't think that's correct, because who gets to choose whose agenda do you forward? If we're going to pay for people's agenda, why don't you forward mine? That's the conversation there. So I would cut all that spending, and I would ask organisations to justify what they're spending. It would be part of my process. There's three things I would do. Firstly, I would send everybody a tax bill at the end of the year, and it would show what the country has been spending its money on. So you'd have a total on it. So, £800 billion, 20% NHS, blah. I would show people where their money's going. Because unless you do that, you're being deceitful. Yeah, your average person is desperately trying to raise their children and pay the bills. They haven't got time to figure out where their tax money is going. They should be told in no uncertain terms. And secondly, all organisations that receive any funding, so anything from the Arts Council to unions, for instance, because they get lots of money around facility time, should have to say what they're doing with that money. And if they can't answer the question in a satisfactory fashion, we'll just have the money back. It's as simple as that. And the last thing I'd do is I'd say to the civil service, 10%, maybe 5% of your budget has to be on innovation. You have to take a risk. And let's be clear, if you take a risk and that money, doesn't come back as sort of best value, it doesn't matter, right? It's a 5% risk because it's in that space of innovation where the real wins are. And I'd say to the department, imagine you spend 2.5% of your budget on an innovation to save money in most departments' cases, and in some department cases, make more money. You would get some of that uplift. I want to incentivize that ministry to do that work. You'd get that uplift to then spend on the projects that your minister thinks they want to do going forward. Because where it is now, our civil service has no commercial imperative, and it knows it can be slow, it knows it cannot innovate, it can be wasteful, because there's absolutely no chance it will not, poor phraseology there, there's no chance it will not get its budget next year, and that means that we have a tardiness in the system, and I'd want to find ways to remove that.
Shaun, thank you very much for joining us.
Absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you to our guest, Shaun Bailey, for talking to us today. If you enjoyed that episode of TPA Talks, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, and stay tuned for future episodes.